This episode is made possible by our sponsor, Landmark College, the college for students who learn differently, offering comprehensive supports for students with ADHD and other learning differences, both on campus and online. Learn more at lcdistraction.org.
Welcome back to Distraction. This is Renee Brooks. Today you're going to get to hear a little bit more of my conversation with Brendan Mahan. In this episode, we're talking about empathy and how not to burn out on it and overdo things. Get into it.
One of the things that helps me in supporting my dad, and it helps me in supporting my kids, everybody, right? And I got it from a business podcast about how to serve your customers more effectively.
Mm-hmm.
But it really is a recipe for empathy. And the way it works is I just try to think about things when I'm in situations. I'm like, what if you're not the main character?
Hey.
So I try to approach stuff as though I am a supporting character in this person's life in the course of whatever's going on, right? So do I love going to my dad's house every Friday? No, like it's stressful because I have a lot of stuff to do and I can't get that stuff done when I go to see my dad because it's a full day of driving. Like he lives an hour away.
Yeah.
So if I have to take him to the doctor's, I drive for an hour to get to my dad's house. I'm there for 10 or 15 minutes. Then we drive for 45 minutes to the doctor's office, do the doctor stuff, drive for 45 minutes back. And then I either hang out with him or depending on how long the doctor visit took. And if I have to get home, then I'm driving another hour home. Right.
Yes.
So there's times when I'm driving around for like 4 hours to take my dad to a 2-hour doctor's appointment, but that's 6 hours out of my day, if not more, if not like another hour at his house, right? 6 or 7 hours, most of which is just me driving around. And it would be really easy, I would imagine, to get cranky about that and to get bitter about that and to be like feeling resentful.
For sure.
But my thought process the whole time is that I am not the main character. Like this is for my dad. My dad's the main character. I'm supporting him. And I work the same way with my clients when they're telling me their stories. I work the same way with my kids and with my wife and with friends. Like you're not burdening me because I'm not the main character. It's you guys are all the main character and I'm here to support all of you. And are there times when I'm the main character? Yeah, absolutely. That is a true story. There are times when in my moments, I'm like, man, it really is hard that my dad is sick, or it's hard that my kid is struggling, or it's hard that my wife is down with a migraine or whatever. And like, that stuff is hard. But when I'm there to support someone else, I'm not the main character. And that's I think the best way I can teach empathy, which is supposed to be something that's hard to teach. And that's the best idea I've come up with so far.
I think you've always been really good at that. Like you've always been really good at being supportive in a way that doesn't center yourself or give the, hey, look at me. Here I am supporting you. Are you paying attention? Do you see me over here being supportive? Which is something like I don't think people mean to do it. I think they do it because it's like, hey, I just want to make sure you know that I'm here. And they don't realize that sometimes it's like, I see you're there and I'm grateful you're here, but I am literally like doing this whole burden thing and I might not be able to respond in a way that makes you feel acknowledged. Not that I wouldn't want to, I just can't.
Yeah.
So that I like, thank you for that. Like just on a personal level, I think that is something that even like, I don't know when you landed on this information, but I would argue that that is something you've always been good at and that I've always been grateful to you for.
Yeah, thank you. It's a tool that's been in my toolbox for a long time now, but I haven't really been thinking about it consciously until the last month or so.
Yeah.
Well, because the show is aimed at parents, right? And I work with parents who struggle to take care of their kids and support their kids because the parents are trying to be the main character.
Yes.
Right. And they're like, my kid drives me crazy. And I'm like, that isn't the plan. Like, you don't have that privilege anymore. Your kids don't get to drive you crazy. They're struggling, and you need to support them to help get them through their struggle. And by the way, there is dignity in struggle. We don't need to resent struggle. There's dignity in that.
Yes,
We just don't want to stay there.
that's right. That's right. It's interesting to me how many of us are walking through this right now and don't even realize it. Like, you're taking care of your dad, and of course, I'm taking care of my mom. And I feel like this is something we could all loop in together and really like of course, the content person in me is always like, wow, this would be so good to share with everybody, but like the part of me that's like human is like, nah, maybe we can just know that we can call each other and say,
Yeah.
or just send a text and be like, hey, this is really sucking today. Just needed to throw that at somebody who gets the fact that this is a sucky day. Like maybe that just needs to be good enough for now.
Right. Yeah, totally. Totally. And like I'm lucky, right? Because my sister, I have two older sisters.
Yes.
And one of them lives literally across the street from my dad. And she also doesn't have kids. And she's a teacher. So like her hours are kind of good for she can get home at like 3:30, 3 o'clock. And she doesn't have the additional challenge of children.
Yes.
And so I'm lucky in that my sister is carrying most of this load. Part of my I am not the main character. I'm also not the main character when it comes to my sister. She needs a break. I will take Fridays. I have a job where I literally can make my own hours because I am my boss. Like I can just
Yes.
decide that I don't work on Fridays if I need to. And so I can take that time to support my sister in supporting my dad, right? Like I'm giving her the break, giving my dad the company and the support that he needs. And that I'm lucky that I can do that. And I don't at all resent the fact that my job, my business plateaued a little bit because everybody else is more important. It's more important that I support my kids who have been going through their own stuff thanks to COVID. It's more important
Yeah.
that I support my dad, that I support my sister. It's a privilege that I can make enough money to like contribute to the household and keep us doing the stuff we want to do and need to do and eat and have a house. But I can also use time to support others as well.
That right there is like it. I have never been so grateful that I am able to do what I do for a living because I would not have made it through this year. Like I would have like I wouldn't have been able to hold a job, certainly. And like I keep saying caretaking for my mom without like pointing out the fact that I'm also doing caretaking for my grandmother and have been all year long. Like I think the beauty of all this, Bren, is that like when you are an incredibly productive individual, it's hard to know your limitations. I've had no choice but to know my limitations this year. I've not been able to push it. And in fact, it taught me more about like you have even more limitations that maybe you didn't realize because you're always so busy pushing it that you don't notice. And this is another area like there's no room there's no room for being an overachiever when people's lives are literally hanging in you being well rested and clear headed enough to make a decision that affects their life, literally.
Yeah. And pivoting out of the caretaking piece, and this depends on your flavor of ADHD, but for me at least, whenever I hear someone say how productive I am,
Yeah.
like that, no, I'm not. Like that's not true. That can't like that's I never did my homework. Like how could I be productive? But I've produced 100 or 207 episodes of a podcast, right? I've done lots and lots of things, and the same is true for you, right? So that frame on ADHD of like, well, you're not productive. You've got to be more productive, more productive, more productive. Learn how to be the god of productivity. You might be already as productive as you need to be, but you've got some bad data because it's based on middle school or something, which is where I am.
Right.
I still base my level of success and productivity on how I did in middle school, which is not accurate.
I think you're absolutely correct.
Yeah, and being able to balance all of this and professional work and the people who count on us to take care of them. And then just the random people who suddenly want stuff or need stuff from us, or opportunities that come along, or friends that want to hang out with us because they haven't seen us in forever. Being able to balance all that stuff, it means that we're doing something right, even if it's not like, even if we're not walking the prescribed path that we thought we were supposed to walk in middle school.
Like, middle schoolers are 11 years old. Can you imagine judging your life by the standards of an 11-year-old? Like, we never consider the fact that, like, we don't listen to children about, like, the way that life should be, because they don't have to. It's not that they don't live real life. They're human beings. They are very much living a real life, but they don't have the responsibilities of adulthood. So 11-year-old Renee had no idea what the hell 37-year-old Renee was going to be dealing with. Who is she to critique that? Can't listen to her.
And 11-year-old Renee's messaging around productivity and around being worthy and doing stuff is a big mahonkin lie, right?
Thank
Because
you.
when you're in school, the message you get, if you turn this in a day late, you're going to get a 0 or lose 10 points or fail or whatever. You have to be perfect all the time because that's the push of school. And that isn't real life. It's not true that when you're 30 years old, 40 years old, if your boss wants something from you, or a peer in your industry wants something from you on Tuesday and you can't get it to them until Wednesday, and you don't even know you can't get it to them until on Wednesday, until Tuesday, you don't suddenly get fired or lose that friend or never hear from them with another opportunity for as long as you live. That isn't how it works, but that's how school trains us. I know I went into the job force feeling like if I make a single mistake, I'm going to get fired. And I couldn't handle that level of pressure. That was entirely my own. I put it on myself. I had one boss who kind of had that perspective, and I crashed and burned pretty hard at that job. But the rest of them, I was putting the pressure on myself. And I worked in schools. So, like, like teachers don't need to be doing that to kids. And admittedly, a lot of them don't do that anymore. I've certainly interviewed plenty on my show to point that out. But there's those of us in our generation still have that impression and that fear.
That's it. Like, and it's like, and that's what all 11-year-olds would be observed. The ones who went to, school, in the way that we're talking about anyway, would have absorbed those things anyway. But then put in the fact that 11-year-old Renee had completely untreated ADHD and didn't even know she had it,
Mm-hmm.
and had no idea what that meant or what would be expected of her in the years to come. So, like, her
Yeah.
perspective is completely out of line with what the reality of our life is.
And then we wonder why people with ADHD struggle with perfectionism, right? And it's because 11-year-old Renee was looking at her peers and going, for me to perform at the level that they're performing, I have to be perfect. So they must be perfect. They must be constantly performing at a perfect execution. And they weren't. They just didn't have ADHD. And I had the same problem. And I just eventually was like, all right, well, I'm just not going to try that hard, because it's one thing to fail if I didn't try. But if I try and fail, that'll crush me. If I don't try that hard and fail, I can always say, yeah, but I didn't try, and like give myself some comfort in that. It took me a long time to learn that that is not a good plan, and that's the road to feeling crappy anyway. It's better to put myself out there and try really hard, and if I fail, I fail, and just accept it. But that perfectionism piece, I think a lot of it comes from those perceptions of middle school ADHD kid and high school ADHD kids, just knowing they're not quite doing it right in the way that everyone else seems to be. And how do I solve that problem? How do I perform better and be perfect like everyone else seems to be?
And it's exhausting.
Mm-hmm.
Being an adult is exhausting anyway, but being an adult who's got that inner voice, who's consistently being accusatory and demanding and is rarely satisfied, is very exhausting. And I think we owe it to ourselves to speak back to that voice as often as we can because it will get quieter. Like it may not ever go away,
Mhm.
but some of the things that my internal voice was into, it just can't accuse me of anymore because I know the truth of it and I've spoken back to that voice. If that makes it, like, I know that's
Yeah.
like, it starts to sound a little weird because it's like, okay, this is you talking to you, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, you have to be an advocate for your own defense because we all have that voice in our head that's like, you suck, you suck, you suck, you suck, you suck. And ironically, that voice is just trying to protect us. It's like, don't take that risk, you might get hurt. But that voice is wrong. And if we don't take those risks, we're going to stagnate. So you've got to take the risks to grow, and growing is scary. Yeah, I'm with you.
Like, people say that neurodivergent people can lack empathy. I find that, and of course, this is just me speaking from my own experience, but I would say a lot of us have an overabundance of empathy, and it actually goes in the opposite direction where we are so empathetic that sometimes our own boundaries have been violated and we excuse it away, and people get away with more with us.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I
Yeah.
just feel like that kind of blanket statement when it comes to what anybody experiences, whether they're neurodivergent or not. Like we really um, could stand to come back to center on that and remember that people are also individuals. That we're not like there's no specific way that people behave based on their neurotype.
Yeah. I think it does a disservice to think that everybody with ADHD or everybody with autism or everybody who's bipolar or fill in the blank is going to present the same way and going to be the same sort of person, while at the same time recognizing that when you have a mental health challenge in those areas, you are kind of defining your sandbox, right? Like the variability is less, but it's still there. It's still, folks are still different.
We're all different, and I think if we like, it all comes back to us. Like, in our spaces, we get so caught up in what we should or shouldn't be held accountable for that we miss the point that maybe the way that we all collectively as a society look at what accountability looks like as a whole is kind of out of balance. Like, because when people talk about, well, how do I hold them accountable, I think so often what they're really asking for is, at what point do I get to punish this person for displeasing me? That is not accountability.
Yeah. And that's dumb. Like accountability, for example, right? Like you mentioned that you, like, if you want to be hanging out with me and go to meetings with me, I might be 10 minutes late. Owning that in advance is you being accountable. So if you're consistently 10 minutes late for this person, they don't need to hold you accountable to anything. You already did it. You already held yourself accountable because you owned it. You're like, this is what's up. This is how it's going to go. And therein lies strength, right? Like taking responsibility for how we work and our foibles and our weaknesses and our strengths and everything is important. It's the way that we get to where we need to go and become fully who we are. Like I one of the things I do is I have no problem owning what I'm good at. And I know some people do. Some people find it uncouth to be like, I'm really good at explaining things. I'm a phenomenal dad. Like there's stuff that I'm just amazing at it. I just am. But the way I figure it, if I'm going to own the stuff that I'm bad at so viscerally and with so much depth of pain, I may as well balance that out by being willing to brag about the fact that I have a really good podcast or I have phenomenal parent coaching groups that have helped an untold number of people, right? Like I may as well balance it.
Yes. No one should be looking to nail anybody. And that's why. Because you can never get a totally balanced look at everything that encompasses what a person has done and what they should or shouldn't be held accountable for. What does that even mean?
Right.
Because if they're,
I think you're onto something with it means I want to punish them.
I do. I've never heard any kind of consequence for for this, that like that's the, like when do they apply consequences? And I would argue that it's very punitive. It's almost like you're like, do you want to put them in jail? Like, what do you want? What do you want here? Like, because if your goal is to have them, I don't know, do the thing or show up on time, like the part of the reason they may be failing in an area is at least partially the fear of whatever consequences coming. Like
Yeah.
that's not helpful, especially like I know, you know, like in the case of children, kids are scared of getting in trouble. They don't want to be in trouble at all.
And it often doesn't make sense, right? Like I was consulting with a woman about her kid who was kind of like he got into fights. Like that was one of the challenges for his ADHD was maintaining his emotional regulation. And so she was telling me about how her kid, they were going to go buy a goldfish after this baseball game, but her kid got in a fight at the baseball game with this kid that he previously had had problems with. And so she didn't buy him the fish. And we've been talking about this fish for like a month or so. And I was like, okay, what does the fish have to do with the fight? Like those two things are not connected.
Not at all.
And too late now, right? Like too late now for me to advise on this, but I was like, that doesn't make sense. Like you still buy the kid the fish. Because if your kid gets in a fight at a baseball game on a day when you're supposed to go and buy him a fish, and then you don't buy the fish, it's so disconnected. The message you're sending is that you don't get to come back from this. Like you're just a bad kid. But if you buy the fish, despite the fact that your kid got in a fight, that's forgiveness. That's reconnection. That's re-engaging, right?
Yeah.
And you still deal with the fact that the kid got in a fight, but you also do some restorative justice stuff where you're like, hey, you've been having conflict with this kid for a while now. What adult dropped the ball here? Because the coaches didn't navigate this in advance. The parents didn't navigate this in advance. It's not like it was out of the blue some kid that he got in a fight with that was not connected to him. It was a kid that they had already had conflict with. So that means there was a systemic breakdown somewhere.
Right. Like, okay, so I'm not advocating for kids fighting, but if it's a kid that doesn't ordinarily fight and they're fighting, I'm not punishing a kid who is not a reactive kid who clearly was goaded in to fighting. Like, I'm not doing that.
And this kid was hot-headed, but even still.
Yeah, like, you know, like, hot-headed doesn't always mean you're gonna take a swing, though. Like, one could argue I'm
Right.
hot-headed, I got a mouth on me. But, you know, if I'm taking a swing, there's been a serious breakdown here. This is like
Yeah.
I'm yell at you reactive. I am not physical altercation reactive.
Yeah. On the consequence and punishment stuff, right? One of the things I say in my groups is I don't believe in the punishment should fit the crime. I'm not a fan of that.
Okay.
It's a nice phrase, but that's about the end of it. I'm a fan of the consequence should fit the solution to the problem.
Okay.
So whatever the problem is that caused you to be upset with this kid, the consequence that needs to maybe come from this should match the solution, right? Like if your kid isn't doing their homework because they're sitting at the kitchen table and not doing anything, and you take away their Xbox, that doesn't make any sense because they're not doing their homework. That's got nothing to do with Xbox. If your kid isn't doing their homework because they're playing Xbox, then taking away the Xbox makes sense, right? Because
Yes.
that's the thing that's distracting them from homework. But if that's not the case, if it's just that they're sitting there and not doing anything or something, what does take away their Xbox do? Well, it's the only thing that motivates them. You're not being imaginative enough.
That part. Like, I will take away everything that you love if you don't do what I want, is not the message that you want to send your kid.
Right.
And that's what it winds up being.
Yeah, you can invert it and say, I'm going to give you more of what you love if you're doing the things that are
Yes.
I expect of you or want of you, right? Like that's
Yes.
okay. That's fine. You know, you come home with an A and you get an extra hour on the Xbox or something, that's totally cool. But the other way around, the punitive side doesn't work unless it fits the solution to the problem. In which case, you're not punishing, you're trying to build skills and help solve this problem.
Right. And you know what? I feel like, okay. I was gonna say I'm not a parent. Actually, I am a semi-parent. I step parented a child. So like I would argue that I feel like I can speak knowledgeably about this. I feel like the quest for consequences is sometimes more based in how the parent wants to feel about their parenting.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I wanna feel like, like, they wanna be like the tough on crime parent. I don't wanna be the permissive parent
Yeah.
who just lets their kid run around doing whatever it is that they wanna do, and you can't run over me like that. I'm the no nonsense parent.
Yeah. What are the other people going to think about me if I'm not hard on my kid enough?
Yes.
You know why that doesn't work?
Why doesn't it work, though?
Because they're not the main character.
Oh! He just brought it full circle, and this is why he's spectacular.
The spotlight is not on them.
But that's what it is. Like, they've personalized their child's behavior and decided that this is who, because you're doing this is now what I am as a parent. This is what I like. What is it? What are the other parents going to do to you? Are they going to shun you? They're not going to play with you on the playground. Like, what are they going to do to you? This is ridiculous. But we all do it because nobody wants to be the overly permissive parent.
And the crazy part is most of the time when we're dealing with this stuff, it's in our own house and no one is going to know.
Nobody knows unless you tell them. Oh my gosh. It's like you're being peer pressured by your imagination.
Uh-huh. That's the part that blows my mind. Like my kids are not perfect. I've talked to my kid's Spanish teacher about something he did wrong. And I was like, "So what's going on in Spanish?" He's like, "Well, I missed some assignments and he did something that she didn't like. So he was reading in class, so he got in trouble for reading." I'm like, that's oh, I guess none of this stuff is like is deal breaking stuff to me. And so like we just talked about it. And I was like, all right, cool. After I meet with her, we'll have a conversation to solve this problem, but not to punish him. Like I said to him, like we'll crack this nut. We'll solve this problem together. That's the plan. So it's just I'm not a punishy guy. It doesn't make sense to me.
It doesn't make sense. And I'm not saying that there aren't situations where consequences aren't appropriate. I just feel like the like so often the consequences, I don't like the way you made me feel about my parenting and I want to punish you because you made me feel bad.
Yeah. And one of the best ways to move past that is to stop thinking of yourself as the main character. It's not about you, it's about your kid. And yeah, a really harsh punishment can maybe teach a lesson, but it does a lot of damage to your relationship with your kid. And there's better ways to teach that lesson, including this is a problem to solve.
That
Let me teach you how to solve this problem and how to get ahead of this and how to get around this challenge so that moving forward, you do a better job. And that doesn't mean that you're going to get the best grade ever in Spanish. And it doesn't mean you're never going to get in trouble in Spanish again. You're not going to start reading in Spanish again. It just means you're going to do better. It just means that like you're going to catch your teacher's glance and go, oh, I should put this book away, instead of the teacher having to come over to you and like take the book away from you. It's that kind of stuff. Like baby steps, progress over perfection is the way to go.
Well, clearly, why are we not running the world yet? I mean, really, if they would just let us run it for a couple
I
of
don't
weeks.
want to.
I mean, I don't either. We're clearly like we got parents to take care of, man. We don't have time. But if we did,
I'm content to just teach people how to do a little bit better. That's all.
that's it. Our little corner of the world is much improved by our presence there. And what else could anyone really ask for? That's if we can all just work on improving our little corners of the world, that I think that is the biggest way to change the world. Because there's no one size solution to change the world anyway.
Yeah. I know for a fact that there are kids going to school who previously were not due to my work. That's pretty good. I know for a fact that there are parents who used to yell at their kids all the time and now don't. Maybe occasionally. I'm not going to pretend it's a total never, but significantly less, and have much healthier and stronger relationships with their kids because of the work that I do.
Yes.
That's fine. I know that there are people out there who have jobs that previously didn't have jobs. I know I had a client who, when I started working with him, he had 2 incomplete master's degrees. He had been kicked out of both programs and he was unemployed. And that was what I got when we started working together. By the time we were done working together, he had gotten back into both master's degree programs, had completed one of them, including a thesis, and it was at Harvard.
Oh my gosh.
And was like progressing into second. And by then he didn't need me anymore. So I was like, cool. And he's told me if he needs help getting the job, he'll circle back around. But he's fine. My job is for him to not need me anymore. You know, like that's why I'm not the main character. Because my job is to get my clients to the point where they don't want to see me anymore. And that's awesome when they don't, when they're done.
Thank you so much for listening in with us today. I hope you learned something that you're able to apply to real life stuff. All of these things require a lot of practice. We think you learn a new tip, a new trick, and you just throw it in there like magic. And sometimes it works like that. But sometimes when you're learning how to incorporate empathy for yourself along with all the empathy you have for others, that's like a muscle that you have to flex. But in the meantime, if you want to learn more about Brendan, head over to ADHDessentials.com. You'll be able to hook up with him there. He has amazing coaching groups for parents. Of course, his own podcast is phenomenal. You can find him there. I'm Renee Brooks, and you can find me at blackgirllostkeys.com. Until next time.
The episode you just heard was made possible by our sponsor, Landmark College, the college for students who learn differently, offering comprehensive supports for students with ADHD and other learning differences, both on campus and online. Learn more at lcdistraction.org.